She looked me in the eye and said, "You don't belong here, Cole. I'm going to need you to pack up your things." I didn't say a word. I just smiled because she had no idea she'd just tried to fire the man who owns 90% of the company. That was the moment everything changed. I'd been working quietly under the radar for almost a year. No title, no corner office, no special privileges. Just a name tag that said Cole, and a faded badge that opened a back door no one important ever used. Most people thought I was an operations assistant, someone who fetched coffee, took inventory, fixed broken printers. Nobody asked questions. I didn't offer answers. It was exactly how I wanted it. My name is Cole Whitman, and I'm the majority shareholder of Whitman & Blythe, a commercial design and development firm founded by my father nearly 3 decades ago. After he passed, he left me 90% of the company in a trust. The other 10% was split between longtime board members and executives. But what most people didn't know, including the one who just tried to erase me, was that I had full voting power and legal authority to remove anyone in the company. Anyone. But I didn't walk in swinging power. That's not how you earn respect. After Dad died, I didn't want to step into his shoes just because my last name matched the sign on the building. I needed to understand how the company worked, not from the boardroom, but from the break room. I wanted to learn the business from the bottom up. So I tucked the trust documents into a safe deposit box, shaved my beard, and took an entry-level job under a different last name. Just Cole. No one batted an eye. I rotated through every department: logistics, admin, finance support, field inspections. I kept my head down and my ears open. What I found was both reassuring and devastating. The core staff was smart, hard-working and loyal, but the leadership, that was where rot had started to spread. Then she arrived, Mary Sanderson, hired as the new regional director with an MBA from Stanford and a resume full of buzzwords. She was tall, polished, and knew how to command a room. Within 2 weeks, she'd reorganized 3 departments and made sweeping changes to policies she didn't understand. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. That didn't last. Mary had a gift for sniffing out weakness, or at least what she perceived as weakness. And in her eyes, I was the bottom of the food chain, a no-degree nobody who always showed up early and stayed late, who never challenged her, who did the grunt work without complaint. Perfect target. It started with condescension. "You sure you know how to format that spreadsheet, Cole?" Then came the public orders. "Go grab us coffee, triple soy for me." I played along, smiled, said "Yes, ma'am," more times than I can count. I wasn't there to get applause. I was there to watch. And then came the email. Mary had drafted a furious message to a client. Aggressive, unprofessional, borderline insulting. She blamed me for forwarding it prematurely. Even though I never touched her laptop, never even saw the draft, she called me into her office, shut the door, and lit into me like I was a high school intern. "You embarrassed me in front of our largest account," she said, voice cold as steel. "This isn't a charity, Cole. We don't reward incompetence here." I didn't respond, just nodded, hands behind my back, eyes on the floor. She leaned forward. "You're done. Clean out your desk." I left the office and walked slowly down the hallway, passing people who barely knew my name, co-workers who didn't even look up. When I reached the break room, I sat down and let the silence hit me like a brick wall. The thing about betrayal is, it only cuts when it comes from people who never bothered to know you. That night, I pulled the envelope out of the safe deposit box, the one with the original ownership transfer, the legal letters from the firm, the control clause my father insisted on adding before he passed. I ran my fingers over the signature, his name, written in ink that still hadn't faded after 10 years. I called our corporate counsel at home, told him it was time. He didn't ask questions, just said, Yes, Mr. Whitman. Mary had spent the past month trying to erase me from a place I helped build, without realizing she was standing on ground I owned. She thought I was a shadow. She never imagined I was the storm. And she wouldn't see it coming until I walked back through those doors. Not with a badge this time, but with a voice that could change everything. The air was thick with heat that night, but I didn't notice. I drove with the windows down, the hum of tires on pavement louder than the thoughts grinding through my skull. My hands were steady, but inside there was a war. The kind of war that doesn't roar, it seethes. I didn't go home. I parked in the empty lot behind my father's old building, the one he used to visit late at night when he needed to think. I stared at the glass windows that once reflected his silhouette and wondered what he'd say if he saw what had become of his legacy. Maybe he'd tell me to stay patient. Maybe he'd tell me it's time. I unlocked the storage unit 2 blocks down, a place no one at the company knew existed. Inside was everything my father left me. Meeting transcripts, contracts, personnel notes, hand-drawn blueprints. He didn't just leave me shares, he left me a blueprint for power. At the center of it all was one envelope, Shareholder Directive 47A, the clause that granted me not just ownership, but operational override. My father never believed in titles. He believed in capability, and he made damn sure I had a way to reclaim what was mine if things ever went sideways. I spread the documents across a fold-out table under fluorescent light and started cross-checking. Every step had to be exact. There was no room for miscalculation. The legal pathway was clear. I had authority to call an emergency vote of no confidence in any executive if fiduciary abuse, harassment, or behavior could be proven. Mary had gifted me all 3. That email to the client? I tracked down the digital footprint, her IP, her timestamp, her draft. My IT contact, someone who owed me a favor, secured the server logs before they could be scrubbed. Then came the HR complaints. 3 in the past month, 2 anonymous, 1 brave enough to go on record, all detailing the same pattern: verbal abuse, gaslighting, threats. I saved everything into an encrypted drive and locked it in a fireproof safe at my place. But I wasn't done. I needed allies. The next morning, I made quiet calls to 4 senior staff, people who remembered me not as a ghost in the hallway, but as the founder's son. I didn't ask for favors. I asked for truth. They gave it, raw and unfiltered. "She's squeezing the departments dry for vanity projects," one said. "She cut training budgets and pocketed the vendor bonuses," another whispered. "She said we needed to modernize leadership." Translation: remove anyone with a spine. I thanked them, told them nothing more. I didn't need them to act. I just needed to know who would stand still when the dust hit the floor. At noon, I sent a formal notice to corporate counsel. Emergency board meeting, 48 hours. The secretary tried to call me. I let it ring out. At 5:00 p.m., I walked through the sliding doors of the building for what I knew would be the last time as a nobody. I passed by Mary's glass office. She was inside, laughing with her assistant, waving a designer pen through the air like a wand. Her eyes met mine, briefly, and slid past as if I were an old stain on the wall. I didn't stop. That night, I returned to the apartment and pulled out my father's last journal. It wasn't business notes, it was personal. "Don't lead with anger, son. Lead with certainty. Anger is short-term power. Certainty builds empires." I didn't sleep much. Instead, I drafted my statement. Not a rant, not a speech, a mirror. One that would show the board exactly what they'd allowed to flourish in my absence and exactly what I intended to do about it. By sunrise, I had everything: exhibits, testimony, legal precedent, a bulletproof presentation. But still, a part of me hesitated, not because I doubted the evidence, but because part of me still hoped she'd stop herself. That Mary would walk into her office, read the room, and realize she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She didn't. The morning of the board meeting, she sent out an all-staff memo announcing a strategic shift in culture and leadership. A thinly veiled swipe at anyone who had dared question her. She was doubling down. That was her mistake. Because the thing about building your throne on arrogance, you never notice the flaws missing underneath you until you fall. And I was done watching from the shadows. I wasn't stepping into that boardroom to argue. I was stepping in to end a reign. Mary strutted into the boardroom like she'd been born to sit at the head of it. She wore a scarlet blazer sharp enough to slice egos, and her heels clicked against the polished floor with the rhythm of someone who thought she owned the tempo. The meeting hadn't even started, but she was already holding court, laughing too loud, pouring herself bottled water like it was vintage wine. A few board members chuckled along, not realizing they were about to watch her unravel. I sat at the far end, quiet, eyes fixed on her every move. To them, I was still just Cole. Background noise, the low-level employee. Nobody noticed unless something broke. But not for long. The chairman called the room to order, tapping the mahogany table once with a heavy silver pen. The energy shifted. Mary adjusted her sleeves and leaned back like she already knew the outcome. Before anything else, she spoke. Of course she did. "I'd like to start," she said, her voice full of performative calm, "by thanking you all for your support during our recent internal restructuring. I understand that change can feel uncomfortable, but we have to be bold if we want to evolve." The gall of her, she went on, parading half-truths as progress. "We've eliminated inefficiencies, brought a fresh cultural perspective, realigned power structures." She used words like visionary leadership and modern innovation as if they were shields, but all I heard was her dressing up a slow-motion disaster in buzzwords and borrowed confidence. Then came the jab. "I also want to address an unfortunate incident involving a former employee," she continued, her tone sweetened with fake concern. "There's been some misinformation circulating, but let me be clear, my decisions were based purely on performance. We can't hold on to underqualified staff out of sentimentality." She didn't say my name. She didn't need to. The smirk that followed was meant for me, and only me. And that's when the chairman cleared his throat. "I believe Mr. Cole Whitman has something to present," he said evenly. A few heads turned. Mary froze mid-sip. I stood. No title on my nameplate, no introduction, just me. I walked to the center of the table and opened a black folder. First, I passed out the evidence, printouts of the email she tried to pin on me, metadata, timestamps, server log. Then 3 HR complaints filed within a 30-day span. Next, financial statements showing unauthorized budget reallocation. Mary's face paled. She glanced toward the door. No one moved. I looked around the room. "I'd like to clarify something," I said, my voice steady. "I wasn't a former employee. I was never just an assistant. I've been with this company for over a decade, in more ways than most of you realize." Then I placed a single-page document in front of the chairman. The official ownership deed signed by my father, granting me 90% controlling interest. Murmurs filled the room. Chairs shifted. Eyes widened. Mary opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't let her. "You fired the majority owner," I said, turning to her, "on grounds of not being qualified enough, without ever asking who I was, without even bothering to read the room you walked into like you were already queen." Her voice cracked. "This is absurd. There's no way this is legal." I raised my hand and pointed at the notarized seal on the document. "It's not only legal," I said, "it's binding." She stood now, scrambling for control. "I was brought in to fix what was broken. This place needed leadership, discipline. This place needed integrity," I cut in, "and instead it got a performance." I turned to the board. "I have no desire to drag this out in public, but I won't allow what my father built, what good people gave years of their lives to be gutted by someone who thinks power is posture." Silence wrapped around the table like a vice. The chairman cleared his throat. I move for immediate dismissal of Mary Sanderson on grounds of misconduct, harassment, and breach of fiduciary duty. One by one, the votes came in. Yes, 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 unanimous. Mary staggered back, her eyes darting around the room for a savior. None came. She looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time. "I didn't know," she whispered. "You didn't care," I said. Security escorted her out 10 minutes later. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just walked out of the same building she once tried to throw me from. This time without applause, without backup, and without a title. And in her absence, the room exhaled. But I didn't. Not yet. Because cleaning up the mess was only beginning. And before the rebuilding could start, I had one more thing to say. Something I'd carried for far too long. And now, finally, I was ready to speak. The boardroom emptied slowly, like no one wanted to be the first to speak after what just happened. People avoided eye contact with me, not out of guilt, but because they were recalibrating their assumptions. In their minds, I'd flipped from invisible grunt to corporate executioner in under 15 minutes. I didn't linger. I had no interest in the whispers or polite nods from people who'd let Mary run unchecked for months. I wasn't here for validation, I was here for reconstruction. The damage she left behind wasn't just operational, it was human. Entire teams were demoralized, long-standing employees walked on eggshells, creative minds were buried under administrative fear. If I wanted to fix this, I had to start from the inside. The next morning, I showed up at 6 a.m. and walked the floors. No blazer, no entourage, just me, coffee in hand, stepping into conversations like I'd never left. People stared. Some flinched, a few smiled. I asked questions no one had asked in a year. What's holding your team back? What did Mary cut that actually mattered? What would it take to make this place feel like it used to? I didn't take notes. I remembered everything. By noon, I'd assembled a short list of employees who were on the verge of quitting. Not because they lacked skill, but because they'd been silenced or sidelined. I brought them into the conference room one by one, not to interrogate, to listen, and I made them a promise. From this point forward, I told each of them, we rebuild on truth, not titles. Still, one person wasn't in the building, Mary. And even though she'd been removed, I wasn't finished with her. Because Mary didn't just mishandle power, she abused it. She'd falsified invoices to funnel money toward her personal branding firm. She'd used company funds to fly consultants to luxury retreats that resulted in no measurable ROI. But the worst? She stole charitable donations. A junior staffer had quietly flagged it in an anonymous HR note. Said Mary had rerouted a holiday-giving campaign through an unregistered non-profit. At the time, no one followed up. They were too scared. Now I wasn't. I hired a forensic accountant and gave her full access. In less than 2 days, we confirmed it. Over $20,000, 0 cents. Gone. Misdirected. Transferred to an LLC in a neighboring state under the name Sanderson Strategy Collective. I filed a formal complaint with the state attorney general. Then I turned over everything to law enforcement. I didn't broadcast it. No press, no leaks, just legal channels, cold and methodical. While the investigation launched, I focused inward. We held a town hall the following Friday. I stood on the same platform Mary had once used to lecture the staff about streamlined excellence, but I didn't speak from above. I stood eye level, mic in hand, and told the truth. Told them who I was, what I'd seen, what I refused to ignore again. I admitted my silence, that it had cost people their voice, and I promised it wouldn't happen again. Then I reinstated employee wellness budgets, reopened mentorship programs, created an anonymous reporting portal tied directly to my office. Some people cried, others clapped, but most just looked relieved, like they could finally exhale. A week later, the detectives showed up. Quiet, focused, no spectacle, They walked out with files, laptops, and a warrant for Mary Sanderson's arrest. The charges? Fraud, embezzlement, misuse of charitable funds. I didn't rejoice. I didn't post. I didn't even tell anyone what I knew would happen. I just sat at my father's old desk, the one no one had touched in years, and looked out at the skyline he used to say was worth protecting. I thought I'd feel victorious. Instead, I felt still, as if justice had stopped the bleeding, but not yet healed the wound. Later that night, I went back to the storage unit, pulled out the last box my father left behind. Inside was a photo, him, me, and the original 5 employees who helped build the company. On the back, in his handwriting, "Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you protect while you're still here." I sat with that for a long time, because now, finally, I understood. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about redemption and protecting something sacred, even if that meant burning down the lies that tried to take it. They called it the reset. Not because I told them to, but because that's what it felt like. In the months that followed Mary's arrest, the office was quieter, steadier. People started leaving their doors open again. Laughter crept back into the break room. Emails didn't carry a trace of fear, and meetings didn't feel like landmines. The walls, once sterile and tense, began to breathe again. But me? I was still in the process of catching up to my own reality. Leadership isn't something you inherit, it's something you grow into, usually the hard way. I sat behind the desk that used to be my father's, still smelling faintly of cedar and leather, and realized I hadn't just reclaimed the company. I'd stepped into a shadow I'd spent most of my life avoiding, and now it was mine. Not because of a surname, because I earned it. The truth about power is, it'll rot your spine if you don't keep it grounded. And what Mary did, what so many do, is wear it like armor when it's supposed to be a responsibility. I wasn't going to make that mistake. I started showing up differently, not louder, just clearer. I created a rotating chair in the leadership team for mid-level staff. No vote, just a voice. I launched a full audit of every internal policy and rewrote the handbook with a simple rule. We don't manage people, we invest in them. And most of all, I kept walking the floor. Because titles mean nothing if the people carrying your company don't feel seen. Still, every story has echoes. One morning I passed the old office Mary used to claim. The glass had been replaced, her name scrubbed off the door. It was empty, but not for long. I turned it into a shared workspace for junior designers. No one owns it now, and that feels right. As for her, last I heard she took a plea deal. No jail time, but banned from executive roles for 10 years. She relocated out west under a different name. No LinkedIn, no trace. She disappeared the way cowards often do, into silence. I didn't celebrate. There's no thrill in watching someone implode when they were never built to stand strong in the first place. What I found more powerful was the day one of the interns. Kelly, 22, barely out of college, asked me if it was really true that I'd once worked under a fake name, hauling paper boxes and fixing copy machines. I smiled and said, "Yeah. It taught me everything I needed to know." She nodded, then asked if I wanted to join their team lunch that day. I went. Sat next to the marketing associate and the IT guy who helped me recover Mary's server logs. We talked about barbecue sauce, not business. It was simple, easy. That's how I knew the rebuild was working. Later that week, I visited my mother. She sat on the porch with her knitting, the same way she did when Dad was still around, humming old Motown and swatting away imaginary flies. She looked up and said, "Your father would be proud." I didn't ask why, because I already knew. He didn't want me to become a copy of him. He wanted me to protect what mattered, the people, the principles, the purpose, and I had, not with vengeance, with clarity. Now, the company's growing again, but this time with depth. We don't chase headlines, we chase heart, and it's working. Some days I still feel the ghost of that first moment when Mary told me to leave. The humiliation, the restraint, the fire under my skin that nearly exploded. But now, when I revisit it, it doesn't sting, it fuels me. Because walking away from that office that day was the beginning, not the end. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one who knows exactly when to wait and when to strike. Now, I'll leave this with you. If someone tried to erase you from something you built, would you expose them publicly? Or would you wait until the moment they thought they'd won and make sure they watched it all fall apart in your name?